say to America is be true to what you said on paper. If I lived in China or even Russia or any totalitarian country, maybe I could understand some of these illegal injunctions. Maybe I could understand the denial of certain basic First Amendment privileges because they haven't committed themselves to that over there. But somewhere I read of the freedom of assembly. Somewhere I read of the freedom of speech. Somewhere I read of the freedom of press. Somewhere I read that the greatness of America is the right to protest far right. And so just as I say we aren't going to let any dogs or water hoses turn us around, we aren't going to let any injunction turn us around. Well, I don't know what will happen now. We've got some difficult days ahead. But it really doesn't matter with me now because I've been to the mountaintop. I don't mind. Like anybody, I would like to live a long life. Longevity has its place. But I'm not concerned about that now. I just want to do God's will. And He's allowed me to go up to the mountain. And I've looked over and I've seen the promised land. I may not get there with you.
Well,
but I want you to know tonight that we as a people will get to the promised land. So I'm happy tonight. I'm not worried about anything. I'm not fearing any man. Mine eyes have seen the glory of the coming of the Lord.
people get ready, there's a train a-coming. You don't need no baggage, you just get on board. All you need is faith to hear the diesels humming. Don't need no ticket, you just thank the Lord. Oh yeah, yeah, thank the Lord. Oh yeah, yeah, thank the Lord. People get ready, there's a train to Jordan, picking up passengers from coast to coast. Faith is the key, open the doors and board them. There's room for all among the loved the most. Oh yeah, yeah, get on board. Oh yeah, yeah, get on board. There ain't no room for the hopeless sinner who would hurt all mankind just to save his soul. Have pity on those whose chances are thinner, 'cause there's no hiding place from the kingdom's throne. Oh yeah, yeah, get on board. Oh yeah, yeah, why don't you get on board? People get ready, for the train is coming. You don't need no baggage, just get on board. All you need is faith to keep the diesel humming. Don't need no ticket, you just thank your Lord. Oh yeah, yeah, thank your Lord? Oh, yeah, yeah. Why don't you thank your Lord? Oh, yeah, yeah. I'm gonna thank my Lord. Oh, yeah, yeah. I'm ready to get on board. That's it.
Welcome to First Unitarian Church of Cincinnati on observance of the Reverend Dr. Martin Luther King's 96th birthday. I am Lou Kerr, this morning's worship associate. The mission of this church is to welcome all with love, to support learning and spiritual growth, to serve with our wider community, and to work for justice, equity, and inclusion. Please make sure to read the announcements and inserts in today's order of service, where you can find important information regarding accommodations. And I have two late-breaking announcements. One is that the food pantry needs to be plowed out before tomorrow morning so they can serve people if anybody has a connection to make that happen. And what's the other one? I don't know. Anyway. Oh! Join us next Sunday, January 19th, for our second congregational meeting of this year. This is your opportunity to catch up on church business. It's 11:15 after church. After a quick coffee, join us right here. The flowers this morning are given by Gerald Black in honor of his wife, Ann Black, on her 85th birthday. And before we begin our service this morning, let's take a moment to wave to the people watching from home and greet our neighbors to say hello, or say hello in the chat. And when you hear the singing bowl ring, return to your seats. This morning, we've asked Mary Tarbell Green, assistant minister, to light the chalice, first in memory of those who have been affected by the ravaging fires in California, and Mary has close family that are people who lost their home. And in addition, we light our chalice in honor of Martin Luther King Jr. He taught us all that the love of God and to surround ourselves with the love of God in the universe. That is the only way we will come out of this with our humanity intact. And our first hymn this morning is, yeah, what? Yeah. Yeah. You go.
We're changing things around a little bit this morning. So each month we designate one of our Sunday plate collections to benefit a special cause or local social service organization. Your donation today will help support the work of Cincinnati Animal Care, an organization located on Coleraine Avenue, which was suggested by First Church member Nancy Kraus. Do you want to bring up the first slide, please? So the vision of this organization is to reunite lost companion pets, reduce the stray population, offer opportunities for unwanted animals to be adopted or rescued, and provide the public with information and programs for responsible pet ownership in Hamilton County. More than 8,000 animals come through their doors each year. So next slide, please. This slide shows the variety of services the organization offers. In the area of animal control, Cincinnati Animal Care serves as a no-kill shelter for Hamilton County. While in custody there, animals receive medical care and temporary housing. The organization also facilitates pet adoption and rehoming. For animals you already have or newly adopt, you can get dog licenses and have your pet microchipped there. And through their Community Cats program, they will spay or neuter feral cats who live outside. To support this organization financially, please make checks payable to First Unitarian Church of Cincinnati with Cincinnati Animal Care in the memo line. All checks so designated and cash collected today will go to this nonprofit. You may also make your donation anytime online this month through Breeze or by mailing a check to the church. If financially is not the way you would like to support the organization, other ways to support them are by adopting animals, providing short and long-term fostering, and even providing day outings for sheltered animals. So for more information, you can check out their website, cincinnatianimalcare.org. So we are doing something a little different this morning. We'll be passing the plate during the opening hymn, and because of that, we will remain seated. But please join now in singing hymn number 347, Gather the Spirit.
Once upon a time, Sister Goose found a beautiful field filled with delicious grass and brought all of her family to it to feast. And they spent hours eating and eating and eating until their bellies grew so big. Can you make a really big belly? Make a really big belly. Make a really big belly. Yeah. Yeah. Oh, I'm so sorry. So their bellies grew so big, in fact, they couldn't fly. They couldn't even walk anywhere. They just had to stand there until all their food digested. Unfortunately, that was when Brother Fox found them. And because they were so full, they couldn't even move, Brother Fox didn't even have to be sneaky about his approach. He could just come up to them and pick them off if he wanted, because they couldn't go anywhere. Thankfully, Sister Goose was smart and said, wait, Brother Fox, we see you. We know why you're here, but before you eat us, could we pray, please? Well, certainly the geese would taste so much sweeter with just a little spiritual enlightenment. So of course, Brother Fox allowed the geese to pray. And so the geese, standing where they were, held out their wings as far as they could. Can you hold out your wings? Hold out your wings. Yeah. And they swayed back and forth, started to sway, and they started to pray, gaggle, gaggle, gaggle. Gaggle, gaggle, gaggle. Gaggle, gaggle, gaggle. Gaggle, gaggle. Keep going. Oh, gaggle. Until their prayer put Brother Fox to sleep. At which point, they had swayed, and they had stood, and they had prayed for so long, all of the food in their big bellies was digested. And they could sneak away and let Brother Fox sleep. And that is how the story ends. And it makes me wonder, when has solidarity helped you? All right, friends, we're going to go to our class now.
Come gather around people wherever you roam. Admit that the waters around you have grown, and accept that soon you'll be drenched to the bone. It's your time to you is worth saving.
and you better stop like a stone, for the times they are a-changing. Come writers and critics who prophesy with your pen, and keep your eyes wide, the chance won't come again. And don't speak too soon, for the wheel's still in spin, and there's no telling who that it's naming. For the loser now will be later to win, for the times they are a-changing. Come senators, congressmen, please heed the call. Don't stand in the doorway, don't block up the hall. For he that gets hurt will be he who has stalled. The battle outside is raging, will soon shake your windows and rattle your walls, for the times they are a-changing. Come mothers and fathers throughout the land, and don't criticize what you can't understand. Your sons and your daughters are beyond your command. Your old road is rapidly aging. Please get out of the new one if you can't lend your hand, for the times they are a-changing. The line it is drawn, the curse it is cast. The slow ones now will later be fast, and as the present will later be past. The order is rapidly fading, and the first one now will later be last, for the times they are a-changing. For the times they are a-changing.
Modern psychology has a word that is probably used more than any other word in psychology. It is the word maladjusted. Now, certainly we all want to live the well-adjusted life in order to avoid neurotic and schizophrenic personalities. But I must honestly say to you tonight, my friends, that there are some things in our world, there are some things in our nation to which I'm proud to be maladjusted, which I call upon all men of goodwill to be maladjusted until the good society is realized. I must honestly say to you that I never intend to adjust myself to segregation and discrimination. I never intend to become adjusted to religious bigotry. I never intend to adjust myself to economic conditions that will take necessities from the many to give luxuries to the few. I never intend to adjust myself to the madness of militarism and the self-defeating effects of physical violence. And I say to you that I am absolutely convinced that maybe the world is in need for the formation of a new organization, the International Association for the Advancement of Creative Maladjustment. And through such maladjustment, we will be able to emerge from the bleak and desolate midnight of man's inhumanity to man into the bright and glittering daybreak of freedom and justice.
Creative maladjustment. It's amazing. That song you sang, that was the most haunting version of the times they're changing I've ever heard. And the first later will be the last. Ever since the election, over the last couple months, I've immersed myself in reading and listening to the words of the Reverend Dr. Martin Luther King Jr. as he publicly weighed in on almost every pressing issue of the day. The list is quite long, and it still reflects our current reality. Racism, extreme poverty, economic inequality, police brutality, political, social, and moral decay, rising militarism, hyper-individualism, and the malignancy of capitalism. King said all of these issues, unless they were honestly addressed, were leading our country and the rest of the world to a religious, spiritual, and cultural death. However, King always was quick to remind us that he was not saying that we haven't made any progress on every one of these existential issues, because we have. We have made incremental but fragile progress. And this is where he would frequently remind us of the Unitarian theologian and abolitionist Theodore Parker, who said, "The moral arc of the universe is long, but it bends toward justice." But, as is witnessed by the results of our last election and the worldwide trend of growing authoritarian movements, we recognize how fragile our societal progress truly is. There are many forces at work today trying to bend that moral arc of the universe in a different direction. It is precisely at this moment that we need to embrace the legacy of Martin Luther King Jr. We must realize that the history, all of the movements for human rights in America, they were no strangers to a fascist authoritarianism. For them, it was known as Jim Crow America, the Chinese Exclusion Act America, the Japanese internment camp America, the Operation Wetback America, the anti-LGBTQI America, the disability exclusion America. The list goes on. Fundamental to all of these human rights movements that suffered from and then confronted authoritarianism was the idea of creative resistance, what our dear brother Martin was referring to as creative maladjustment. As Dr. King said in the video clip right before this sermon, we all must become creatively maladjusted to the injustices and dysfunctions of the world. We must refuse to be adjusted to a status quo that is destroying our ability to survive. Today, I want to explore what that meant theologically and practically to Martin Luther King and how it is relevant for our lives today. Now, the term creative maladjustment was a constant theme that Martin Luther King used in speeches countless times throughout his public life. The first time I'm aware he used the term was in 1957, 10 years earlier than the film clip we just saw, which was in 1967 when he was speaking in front of the American Psychological Association, 1 year before his death. In 1957, King was invited to give the closing speech at the 25th anniversary celebration of the Highlander Folk School in Monteagle, Tennessee. Today, Highlander is known as the Highlander Research and Education Center. Highlander was a renowned education and training center or institution for the American labor movement and the civil rights movement. Over the years, Highlander received support from people like Eleanor Roosevelt, Albert Einstein, Reinhold Niebuhr, and many other progressive thought leaders of 20th century America. Now, in the summer of 1955, Mrs. Rosa Parks attended a 2-week seminar at Highlander in that summer. And the topic was fighting segregation. She had come there thinking that the causes in Montgomery, Alabama were hopeless, that people would never change, and that her community would never resist. That 2 weeks changed her life. 4 months later, she refused to surrender her bus seat to white patrons on the racially segregated Montgomery, Alabama bus system. Thus began a major turning point in the struggle for human rights in Jim Crow America. And it also launched the national activist career of Martin Luther King Jr. For King to give the closing address at this Highlander event only 2 years later marked his arrival as a leader among leaders. Human rights activists from all over the country were in attendance at this event. This was also the first time he had ever heard the song, "We Shall Overcome," a song that Highlander supporters, Pete Seeger and Zilphia Horton, had adapted from at least 3 different gospel songs. In that closing speech for the weekend, The Look to the Future, King urged his audience to always be maladjusted. And he said, "For you see, it may be that the salvation of the world lies in the hands of the maladjusted. The challenge to you this morning as I leave you is to be maladjusted. As the prophet Amos, who in the midst of injustices of his day could cry out in terms that echoed across the centuries, 'Let judgment run down like waters and righteousness like a mighty stream.'" Now, King understood that a true social change movement must always be discontented with the status quo. That was particularly true if it was to overthrow a social and economic system that was based on supreme injustices and the denial of one's humanity. He also recognized that the social desegregation victories of schools, restaurants, buses, theaters, and parks were actually very tiny victories when compared to the gross economic and opportunity inequalities that must be torn down for Black America and other oppressed minorities to ever be truly free. It was a huge task. Part of King's legacy for us, then, is that we must not allow ourselves to get adjusted to a social and political world that thrives on division, that thrives on hate and authoritarian power. We must never allow that world to be normalized. The first tactic of American authoritarianism is to wrap itself in the flag and call itself true patriotism. The second tactic of American authoritarianism is to call all adversaries communists. socialists, people out to destroy the society. This is precisely what the Southern segregationists proceeded to do. Highlander and King had to be demonized, especially since King was rising in his prominence. The Southern and national power elite had always hated Highlander for their work in building the American labor movement in the 1930s and 40s. And now, with Highlander deeply engaged in the civil rights movement, they were very nervous. The Georgia Education Commission, a pro-segregation branch of the governor's office, dispatched a spy to the 1957 Labor Day gathering. He gathered pictures for propaganda purposes. They plastered one of those pictures on billboards all over the South. And if we could show that one more time, the one previous. Charging King with communism and labeling Highlander as a communist training school. There were hundreds, if not thousands, of these billboards scattered all over the country, but primarily in the South, because that's where the battle was being waged. And this is how King got labeled as a communist. And it was a charge that followed him the rest of his life. Okay, we can bring the slide back down now. For King, the red baiting was something that he anticipated. And it fit theologically into the space he had carved out for himself as a follower of Jesus' nonviolent revolution, a follower of Jesus who faced similar treason charges, being at odds with the order of the Roman Empire. In addition to the billboards, the Georgia Education Commission also put together a slanderous, slickly produced broadside, we can show that now, charging King and every Highlander attendee with communism. More than 250,000 of these broadsides were printed and mailed to newspapers, politicians, organizations in every region in the country, including Cincinnati. Here in Cincinnati, one of the targets of the broadside was the Reverend Morris F. McCracken. And I know you can't see it from this picture, but in the upper right-hand corner is a picture of Mac with the Findlay Street neighborhood house car that he drove down to Highlander. There's also another picture of him down in the lower left where he's talking in a circle with a number of other people. Now, McCracken pastored the racially integrated West Cincinnati St. Barnabas Presbyterian and Episcopalian Church. McCracken was called a communist race agitator. They claimed his affiliation with the United Way through the Findlay Street Neighborhood House and Camp Joy, both of which he directed, indicated how deeply entrenched the communist apparatus was in our American way of life. Even the United Way became a communist front organization to these people. As a result of this segregationist hate campaign, the American Legion launched a boycott of the United Way until McCracken was fired from the camp and the settlement house. Then, the Presbytery of Cincinnati initiated a secret ecclesiastical trial to strip McCracken of his ordination and leadership in the church. Then, the city of Cincinnati even cut off the water supply to Camp Joy, which was the first racially integrated youth summer camp in America. It had even impacted the city government. Now, this is where the story becomes personal to our church and to St. John's Unitarian Church, because in a grand act of solidarity, Reverend Bob O'Brien of our First Unitarian Church and Reverend Clark Wells of St. John's organized our congregations to form the Committee for the Freedom of Conscience to publicly support McCracken. Now, that doesn't sound like it's a very big thing to do, but in the time of the McCarthy era and the anti-communist hysteria, that was a huge step. Our minister, Bob O'Brien, was also the president of the local branch of the American Civil Liberties Union. The ACLU held their regular meetings at our church, and they joined the committee to publicly defend McCracken as well. At that moment in time, our ministers and our congregation chose to oppose anti-communism in our city. We chose to be maladjusted at that point in time to racism, to bigotry, and naked political power. As most of us know, McCracken lost those battles. He was fired from those positions. His ordination was stripped from the Presbyterian Church. They even took his retirement away from him, left him with nothing. But he went on to many pivotal roles in the civil rights movement, the prison reform movement, and the peace movement, leaving behind his own legacy of holy resistance to evil. Because of this, he always considered our congregation and St. John's to be among his closest allies. The lesson from this is that no matter how small, and it really was a small act on our part, no matter how small, an act of solidarity with people being persecuted carries power beyond our imagination, because it supports and encourages people to continue despite their persecution. That's critical. People suffering the most need solidarity from people who do not suffer. Another King legacy is deeply theological, and it has to do with the nature of God. Martin Luther King, and he reasoned Jesus too, served a God of unconditional love and forgiveness that welcomed all. As students in Boston, Martin and Coretta King frequently attended the Arlington Street Unitarian Church, where they listened to the preaching of Dana Greeley, who became the first president of the Unitarian Universalist Association in 1961. They agreed with much of the liberal theology of Unitarianism. They nearly joined the Unitarian Church at that time. But as much as King theologically agreed with Unitarians about the nature of God, he could not agree with what he considered liberal naivete and arrogance about the basic nature of people. Unitarians and liberal theologians believed in the perfectibility of humanity and in the inevitability of progress. There was this supreme naive optimism from King's point of view. King had seen enough of human prejudice, ugliness, and injustice growing up in the South to know that humanity is far from perfect and that we have such a great capacity for evil that it is not inevitable that we will build a just society. Life in the South was proof of that. In reflecting on his Boston experience, he wrote, "Liberalism failed to show that reason by itself is little more than an instrument to justify man's defensive ways of thinking. Reason devoid of the purifying power of faith can never free itself from distortions and rationalizations." Without realizing it, King was staking out the universalist critique of Unitarianism. Unitarians lack the humility of a life lived by faith. And by a life lived by faith, he meant someone who is willing to put their beliefs into action, get their hands dirty, working for justice, knowing that it will never be perfect. Universalists say humanity is not saved because humanity is so good. Humanity is saved because God is unconditional love and forgiveness. That's the universalist definition of God. It recognizes that, as Alex said, we're all scoundrels. Amen. And that we need to remind ourselves of that, and we need to keep that humility. Unitarians tend to be hung up on human perfection, and that's always been a problem of liberalism in general. This is why King assailed liberals in his letter from the Birmingham jail for being armchair critics of his nonviolent campaign for integration and educational justice in Birmingham. They argued he was moving too fast for the society to keep up. His book, Why We Can't Wait, destroyed the liberal argument that change must happen more incrementally. It was as though liberal America thought that 350 years was not long enough to wait for freedom and racial justice. Even today, it's taken a lot of work to convince liberals inside the Unitarian Universalist Association that the movement for Black Lives was worthy of our support. We wanted a perfect movement to be able to support, and we wanted to nitpick what they were doing when they were putting themselves on the front line when we sat comfortably back and watched. On the other hand, King also rejected fundamentalism and what he called neo-Orthodox Christianity. He clearly saw Orthodox Christianity as a theological tool of authoritarianism and the brutality of Jim Crow America. If liberal religion saw humanity too good to be condemned to hell, religious fundamentalism saw humanity as so depraved that their salvation depended on the whim of a jealous and punishing God who saves some humanity only if they swear their absolute allegiance to that God. King's dream of the beloved community centered on his understanding of a loving God that saves all of humanity. He was a universalist. And this is in stark contrast to the theology of Orthodox Christianity that supported authoritarian political leaders. A capricious and punishing God matches perfectly with a capricious and punishing dictator. This is the leader who passes out favors to those who swear their allegiance to that leader, while that leader serves up hell to those who are targeted and purged from the benefits of society. We are seeing this played out today. This theology seeks to divide people, making it easier to govern with a heavy hand. That is precisely why Jim Crow America accomplished for the ruling classes both in the South and the North. Not only did King see himself as maladjusted to this kind of world and theological order, but he also saw his ministry as serving people who are labeled maladjusted or marginal to the society. His goal, like Jesus's, was to minister to those left behind and then to build bridges of unity with all people so that we could actually build a better world in the here and now. He wanted to build a community that led with love, not division and hatred. This was a theology of inclusion rather than a theology of exclusion. So what did King's ministry of inclusion look like? I'm going to take two striking examples that stand out: the Montgomery bus boycott and the Birmingham Children's Crusade. Both of these events are serious examples of living by faith, or what the theologian friend of King's, Clarence Jordan, always said: faith is living in scorn of the consequences. It must be said at the outset that in both of these circumstances, King was a reluctant leader. In Montgomery, he was thrust into leadership partly because he was the new kid on the block, and he was a well-spoken minister who had no previous political baggage in town. So he was an easy person to put up there. It didn't hurt that he could think fast on his feet. The big lesson for everyone, and King included, was that this movement for social change could only succeed when large numbers of people were empowered by the process. They also learned that the forces of oppression can only succeed with the consent of the oppressed. King wrote in Stride Toward Freedom that He who passively accepts evil is as much involved in it as he who helps to perpetrate it. He who accepts evil without protesting against it is really cooperating with it. When oppressed people willingly accept their oppression, they only serve to give the oppressor a convenient justification for his acts. Often the oppressor goes along unaware of the evil involved in his oppression so long as the oppressed accept it. So in order to be true to one's conscience and true to God, a righteous man has no alternative but to refuse to cooperate with an evil system. The black citizens of Montgomery had given in, they acquiesced to their Jim Crow status for nearly 100 years. That's a lot of inertia to overcome. It was anybody's guess as to whether the protests inspired by Rosa Parks' refusal to no longer cooperate with her oppression and whether it would be contagious enough to be sustained. The black religious leadership of Montgomery, along with Parks and the legal team supporting her, took a chance by inviting the entire black community to several public meetings to just discuss the possibility of a one-day bus boycott and then to assess where they were going to go after that. Because ordinary people felt included and respected by this process because they deeply listened, the leadership deeply listened to them. They took the chance and they claimed their own humanity that had been stolen for centuries. That was the kind of momentum and self-empowerment that sustained the people of Montgomery for a solid year. The stories of that movement are overwhelming, and how creative those people were. Many of them walked to work for a solid year, or they got carpooling, or they found alternate ways to get where they needed to go. They held firm to their boycott through great hardship. They chose to be creatively maladjusted to their own oppression, and they won a major victory for themselves and the entire country when finally the city leaders of Montgomery collapsed and gave in. Now, from the Montgomery bus boycott in 1955 to the Birmingham Children's Crusade of '63, the battles for a national legislation prohibiting social segregation and protecting the right to vote had stalled. Slow but steady progress was frustrating many civil rights activists. And additionally, the power of anti-communist campaigns against King and the movement hindered more broad national support from white America. There were many white people who were afraid to do anything regarding the civil rights movement because they didn't want to be called a communist. Birmingham raised the stakes because of the extremely violent response of that city's segregationists. Known more as Bombingham than Birmingham, the Klan had set off more than 100 bombs of black leaders' homes, churches, and businesses in defense of the Southern way of life. Reverend Fred Shuttlesworth of Birmingham challenged the segregationists and the Klan at every step, having his own home bombed as well. These unsolved and unprosecuted bombings were business as usual in Birmingham. Clearly, they would have not been tolerated if they had been committed by anyone other than right-wing extremists. This is the sad and often repeated story of violence in American history. The flashpoint of the spring of '63 was the drive for racially integrated public schools. Shuttlesworth determined that the world needed to see Southern brutality in as graphic a way as possible. He proposed to King and the SCLC that they all lead a children's march for integrated schools, knowing full well that the Birmingham police, under the command of Bull Connor, would be violent in their responses. King and the SCLC pushed back, arguing that they could not in good conscience allow the blood of the children to be shed. But after a long series of debates, Shuttlesworth prevailed and convinced everyone that it must be done. Can you imagine getting to the point that where you were ready to sacrifice your own children? to get what you needed to be free. In the run-up to those days of 1963, when the Birmingham police unleashed their batons and their water cannon on the children of Birmingham, several other actions of civil disobedience to segregation took place, resulting in the jailing of King, Abernathy, Shuttlesworth, and the rest of the leadership. This is when King wrote his famous letter from the Birmingham jail, as a response to the moderate religious leaders who claimed that King and the movement were moving way too fast for change in America. True to Shuttlesworth's analysis, the film and still images of the children being beaten and blown around by water cannon shocked the world out of its complacency, causing many to attack the hypocrisy of a country that claimed to be a beacon of freedom and equality. King and every leader of the movement recognized that responding to an overwhelmingly violent, authoritarian system with more violence would never win the day. It was the power of public suffering that would bring with it freedom and equality. It's part of the contradiction of this. Reflecting about all of this in a sermon titled The Foundation of Hope, King stated, "We Negroes have long dreamed of freedom, but still we are confined in an oppressive prison of segregation and discrimination. We must respond without bitterness. Must we respond with bitterness and cynicism? Of course not. For this is blasphemously attributes to God that which is of the devil. Our determined refusal to not be stopped will eventually open the door of fulfillment, possibly achieve our humanity's full stature. To guard ourselves from bitterness, we need the vision to see in this generation's ordeals the opportunity to transfigure both ourselves and American society. Our present suffering and our nonviolent struggle to be free may well offer to Western civilization the kind of spiritual dynamic so desperately needed for our collective survival. Some of us, of course, will die without having received the realization of freedom. But we must continue to sail on our charted course. We must accept finite disappointment, but we may never lose infinite hope. Only in this way shall we live without the fatigue of bitterness and the drain of resentment." These were amazing words, and they came from a man who was feeling the weight of 350 years of history, full of misery and dehumanization. The rest of 1963 is well known. The August 28 March on Washington, the September bombing of the 16th Street Baptist Church in Birmingham, the November assassination of President Kennedy, and then the creation of Curtis Mayfield's song, "People Get Ready," that we heard today. This was Curtis Mayfield's response to all of these events of 1963, making that song as popular as "We Shall Overcome" within the civil rights community. Then in 1964, President Johnson signed the Civil Rights Act, followed by the '65 Voting Rights Act, both of which reaffirmed and strengthened the 14th and 13th Amendments to our Constitution, which guaranteed equal application of the laws and the inalienable right to vote. In December of '64, the Reverend Dr. Martin Luther King received the Nobel Prize. It had taken centuries, but finally, an authoritarian system of oppression had been legally overthrown in a peaceful movement. The challenge we face today is whether we can defend these blood-soaked legal victories or not. What King and many other leaders of the civil rights thought leaders of the civil rights movement did was to put love at the center of everything they did. Out of a love for humanity, they suffered and pricked the conscience of the world. That love moved us all forward. Out of love for their people, they found a path of liberation that affirmed their humanity and created the possibility of revolutionary change. They found a way to live out their deeply held faith in scorn of the consequences. They learned many important lessons along the way. Most importantly, they learned that a government and structure of oppression cannot function and continue to oppress without the consent of the oppressed or the consent of the people who are not harmed by that oppression. As we look ahead to this new era of authoritarianism in our country, we must remember to lead with a love for all of humanity that includes the people who are the targets of this American-made fascism. We must build a beloved community of solidarity that empowers us all. As our brother Martin King demonstrated for us, we must learn to be creatively maladjusted to a world that often operates through injustice. And then we can shower the people we love with love.
We can play the game. You can act out the part. You can play the game. Out the part wasn't written for you. Tell me, how can you stand there with your broken heart, ashamed of playing the fool? One thing can lead to another. It doesn't take any sacrifice. Oh, father and mother, sister and brother, if it feels nice, don't think twice, just shower the people you love with love. Show them the way that you feel. Things are gonna work out fine if you only will. Do as I say, just shower the people you love with love. Show them the way that you feel. Things are gonna be much better if you only will. You can run, but you cannot hide. This is widely known. Tell me, what do you plan to do with your foolish pride when you're all by yourself alone? Once you tell somebody the way that you feel, feel it beginning to ease. I think it's true what they say about the squeaky wheel always getting their grease. It's better to shower the people you love with love. Show them the way that you feel. Things are gonna be just fine if you only will. What I'd like to do to you, shower the people you love with love. Show them the way that you feel. Things are gonna be much better if you only will. Shower the people you love with love. Show them the way that you feel. Shower the people you love with love. Show them the way that you feel. Shower the people you love with love. Show them the way that you feel. Shower the people you love with love. Show them the way that you feel. Everybody sing. Shower the people you love with love. Show them the way that you feel. Shower the people you love with love. Show them the way that you feel. They say in every life,
people you love with love.
they say the rain must fall, just like the pouring rain.
People you love with love.
Make it rain.
Show them the way that you feel.
Make it rain. Love, 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 the sunshine.
The way that you feel.
Make it rain. Love, 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 the sunshine.
The way that you feel.
Shower the people you love with love. Show them the way that you feel. Shower the people you love with love. Show them the way that you feel. Better to show that you feel this way.
Shower the people you love with love. We extinguish this flame, but not the light of truth, the warmth of community, or the fire of commitment. These we carry in our hearts until we meet again. Amen.